G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now yesterday we didn't have many map movements. Today is quite the opposite. We have some significant movements on the maps and we will talk about this in length and look at the consequences of what has happened. Of course, we're going to look at aid, we're going to talk about mobilization, we're going to look at a comms tower that has been hit in Kharkiv and possibly a Russian offensive in that direction and what some chatter amongst groups, amongst officials is telling us. But let's get straight into where we want to talk about today. And look, let's start right on the maps. Something very different. So here is the map. I'm zoomed in here, but we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, and the purple, of course, since 2014. This being Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk. Here. Now, where we've been focusing a lot of the time is down in the east here. We see this push out. Now, this is where we're going to speak about, but in a little bit, out from Avdiivka. Since Russia got Avdiivka, this attempt to push to the second line of defense and where this may go. But we just want to talk over some bits and pieces of what we could potentially see in the future. So, here we have Kirill Budanov talking, of course, head of the intelligence services in an interview with BBC. Now, this second half is what we're interested in, but we will talk about this first part as well. You are known for your predictions, quite positive forecasts. You know what I'm talking about. The armed forces will soon be in Crimea and so on. Do you regret it? He said, I said that we will go to Crimea. Do you regret this? Never. I never regret the past in general about any. The fact that sometimes the situation changes drastically. After all, if you were talking about my personal words, then our units entered Crimea. We have seen some small contingents of special forces land in Crimea, but what was meant was that there will be an offensive successfully through Crimea from Ukraine. We saw Ukrainian pages also plan on hosting like the Crimean beach party. Do you think that such forecasts give people false hope? No, they do not give vain hope. These are real-time forecasts. In something comes back a little differently, sorry, it makes its own adjustments. But one thing I will say is, like the build-up to Ukraine's counter-offensive last year and the massive build-up and what was seen to be what was going to come of that, I think then when the reality set in of the failure of that, I actually think it had a huge propaganda negative effect. And I think that influenced as well people's support in Western countries for further funding and where the future of this war may go. But this is what we're going to talk about in here. Talking about what is to come. In our opinion, a rather difficult situation awaits us in the near future, but it is not catastrophic. This must also be understood. Armageddon will not happen, as many are now beginning to say, but there will be problems from mid-May. I'm also talking about the front. This is a comprehensive approach because the Russians will use a comprehensive approach. They conduct a complex operation. We will not talk about it with you for a long time, but it will be a difficult period, mid-May, early June. So, of course, we are in late April, and these are the dates we've been sort of leaning on a fair bit of mid-May, June, that Russia will have some major offensive push, and we are seeing Russia having success on the front line. And one thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of chatter. That Russian sappers, combat engineers, are clearing mines in the directions, at least from Kursk, Belgrade, in these areas, of course, crossing into Sumy, Kharkiv, that could there be an offensive across here, where we have seen, of course, Russian units cross before in the war. Of course, these were cleared out, and some of these in 2022 and pushed back. But that there are sappers clearing mines along this borderline here. Now, one thing I will say about this is that we've seen crossings, of course, both ways here. But from Zelensky's Twitter, from officials' Twitter, we have seen that Ukraine is heavily fortifying Kharkiv and Sumy oblasts, of course, within Ukraine. And by fortifying in this direction, Ukraine is acknowledging that this is a possible direction of attack. So what we'll see there, I guess we will wait and see. But like Budanov said, it's going to be a difficult period in the months coming. Now, let's speak about Novomylivka as something lines up for what we spoke about the other day. So down in here, we saw this advancement over the last couple of weeks or last week through And there we go. Now, one thing I'll talk about here, and we'll link to Oshotini later on, is once there is a break into an urban area, that Russia has sped up to then clear that urban area. The break into here took months and months and months. Some will say 10 years if you look at where the purple lies here. But from time of break into time of occupation, very, very quick. Now, on this as well, Russia claims, this is by Ukraine, Russia claimed to have captured Novomaylivka. Ukraine's armed forces insist they hold part of the village. Just this part up in here. Of course, we'll line this up with the Syriac map in a second. But the part that I want to speak about, so this is disputed, but the part I want to speak about is down here. The Russians conducted an offensive with both military equipment and infantry, often moving in small assault groups consisting of 6 to 8 people. So these small combat attack teams moving in. Now, this lines up with what I spoke to you about the other day in a video that got demonetized and restricted so that no one saw it. But this was of a guy on the ground. I cannot say who this is, but maybe after the war, this will be very interesting. But talking about Chasiv Yar and similar tactics of what Russia is learning. So that the VDV, of course, Russian paratroopers, are led by Spetsnaz. They, in small teams, utilizing hit-and-run tactics along with their joint fires capability, and it's working well, and they're gaining ground fast. Small, hard, fast teams in and out. Something the Ukrainians should be doing, and that's what I would do. The Russians are constantly learning and amending their tactics. The Ukrainian command needs a punch in the head for years of lazy incompetence. Now, if you haven't seen this video, go back and watch this because it's speaking first-hand experience continuing on how the SF, the Special Forces, are being used in some directions, and it is having large losses that are necessary. But you have VDV paratroopers, so tier down from your Spetsnaz, but Spetsnaz training those guys on. Similar way a lot of operations are run if you run it up with like your with your special forces somewhere in the country. So that is interesting, and I think that just confirms what that gentleman there is saying. But Novomaylivka, I know you want me to talk about somewhere else, but let's talk about this area here. So Syriac says this, situation southwest of Donetsk, Russian army took full control over the locality of Novomaylivka. In addition, troops made a series of advances southwest of it towards the Ugledar road. So this down here, we saw this move the other day in this direction. So let's look how similar this is. It's hard to line up, but we know there's been massive movement in that direction, and saying that the rest of Novomaylivka has come under control, weighed out on that, but at least 90% or more is under Russian control in this direction. Now, this is where you want me to talk about an area that has come under control very quickly, and this should be concerning. Now, it's this area, of course, this is Avdiivka, so just to the northwest, this Oshotini that we have seen from yesterday till today has been a large expansion of Russian control. Now, this is what I was talking about before with Novomaylivka. From time of break-in to time of occupation is very quick. So we're back here on the 16th. So today's the 23rd or the 24th? 23rd. So 16th. Step up, and then we see this push through here. Of course, a lot of this coming under control. Now, there's been a lot of people point fingers at exactly what has happened here and troops pulling back. But what we got first off was this part of footage here of these Russian soldiers. Now, I don't have anywhere where this is translated, but we can see high morale, running dual nods on helmets as well, which is very interesting to see as well. So I've spoken about this area as well as in Novomaylivka. We are seeing a lot of better equipment on the front line, and this may line up with what I was speaking about with VDV Spetsnaz as well, with different gear on different guys. Of course, you can see this if you see regular infantry work with SF or vice versa. Who's what? Of course, may have just left his bloody nods on his helmet, but in the middle there, and we will see Ukrainian reports saying this: Russian forces could pretty much walk in uncontested and occupy the southern part of the railway tracks while preparing a bigger assault squad to advance in the northern part of the village. Today's footage emerged of the presence already in the centre. The 47th arrived, so we know troops there had a withdrawal, and then the 47th from Ukraine is now currently trying to fight back that area. But this isn't as simple as some other maybe bloggers online who have never, I presume, never been under fire will say. So we see this Ukrainian page here saying, situation in Oshcheni, Avdiivka Astis, what I know from my friends from that direction, it is hell. Unfortunately, one of the newly arrived brigades, the 115th Mech Brigade or 115th Mech, left its positions without permission, which led to a breakthrough by the Russians. Due to the incompetence of the brigade command and the cowardice of the soldiers, I think sitting on Twitter, not fighting, calling guys on the front line fighting, cowards, I don't like, you don't know what the situation actually was. The soldiers of the 47th Mech Brigade have had to urgently engage combat with the superior enemy forces. The fucking 10th Army Corps screwed up even here. So saying there's a lot of problems happening here, and this is what you're going to get. If you get these newly arrived brigades, especially when we're speaking about Ukraine's about to mobilize, we know they need to mobilize in the hundreds of thousands of guys. Well, it's going to be a very different attitude and different skills fighting on the front line. Now, I'm not saying these guys, but I'm saying that this is something we could see exacerbated and get worse through the coming weeks, months, years as well. We know there's big problems, but this is what everyone is saying, that there was a withdrawal. Russians basically, to quote, walked into that direction. Now, this is very important, but I want to watch this part of footage that is said to be from here, from a Ukrainian soldier here. So we effed up. Oh, sorry. How do I make this smaller? How do I get rid of the... There we go. When to get out of here, 8 kilometers under shelling, it's just effed up. We have till night, move out, a lot of dead, a lot of wounded. So it's all good and well to sit here like me or like these other guys and look at a map and go, oh, blah, 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 this is what they should do. Unless you are on the ground, under shelling, under fire, fuck, like, you know, these guys, they know what it's actually like, and they have decided maybe to save their lives and their comrades' lives who, you know, are still alive, because as he said, there's a lot here, and have a withdrawal. And we know these areas are being hit incredibly hard with Russia's FABs, what have had a huge success and a change on the front line. Now I think the weapon system that has had the second biggest change on the whole war are the glide bombs. Of course, being firstly the FPV drones utilized by Ukraine in the beginning and then really adopted by Russia. But those FABs, huge effect. Now, let's have a look at a couple of maps. We have then the Noel reports map here, showing that Russia has filled in some space just out from where this train line comes, to see where it dips down. So showing similar to what then the MOD map is saying, and maybe a little bit less control over some of these areas, but very similar in Oshcheni as well. So we know there was a major advancement there. And let me turn this on so you can see where the movement actually came out and opened up. But again, this opened up very quickly. Now, then we'll line up with the Syriac map. So we actually have, I believe, 2 of these. So this is, earlier in the day, then later in the day. So day 789. So we see this first push down here. North of Avdiivka, Russian army broke Ukrainian defenses and occupied about 25% of the locality. And then later on that day, we get on the left this map that shows this opening up, and this is what we've seen. These maps are lining up exactly with what we're seeing, like the MOD NOAA reports saying almost to the exact road. But as of 2300, Russian army took control of the center of Oshcheni as Ukrainian army continued retreating towards Oldcom Brick Factory in the northern neighborhood. So a push out here. Of course, it's going to be very difficult to move out of here. Like that gentleman, that young soldier in the video said, that they could be moving kilometers under fire and will have to have a withdrawal at night. Now, how important is this area? It is very important. So while I was speaking to a friend of mine, contact on the ground, he was saying that down near Semenivka, although the Russians may cross and get a bridgehead here, the dead ground that sits to the north and south is going to be very difficult. And he did say all of this is open, flat ground that is mined to hell. And he was saying, look, there's no way they're going to move through there. What they're going to try and do is an envelopment, and this is what we are seeing. Of course, we've seen this push out through to trying to get somewhere like Ulmansk. We're seeing this push out here, and this is key tactics of what we've seen in areas like Avdiivka, Bakhmut, Mariupol, areas like this, to try and leapfrog town to town and eventually cause some level of envelopment here, and this will then subsequently then collapse. Now, of course, how far off is this? Is it possible? Well, we don't know. The future, like everything, the future will tell if this is possible or will not, but we know that there's weeks before the Ukrainian soldiers are going to get any relief from those systems coming in from the money from the US and from the UK. This takes a long time, and to backfill is much more difficult. So imagine you're trying to keep a bucket with a hole in it full. If it's full and you're just shoveling in water, you may be able to keep it full. But if that drains right down to the bottom and trying to fill it up, you've got a lot more work to do to get that leaking bucket back up to full. We know the first things that are going in are long-range strike weapons. This will have an effect. Will it change on the front line? Well, maybe not as much as other systems, but Russia do risk overextending themselves here, as well as this is only a very thin push out here. What they do need to do for a successful further operation is try and expand this control through here. So this couldn't be cut off and or overextended. As well, though, we could see that Ukraine may overextend themselves, trying to hold back this area and have Russian advances in other areas with other troops. Overextension is a real threat of what's going on. Now, we see a lot of topographical maps of this area. So this is Avdiivka, this is Oshetini. What we can see is this is sitting on high ground through here. And I see many, many pages pointing at this. This is where the front line is, and that high and low ground. Now, if you actually look down on the Google Maps, this isn't like mountainous terrain. Yes, there is higher and lower ground here. Of course, that creates dead zones and dead ground. And of course, that helps mortars and artillery and FPV. But this is still, the difference between the ground is not much. What this is showing here is change between the ground, not that something is super, super high. So I think the talk about the high and low ground may be blown out of how important it is in some of these areas. It's not like Bakhmut where you have these really rolling hills. It's still fairly flat. It's just the difference in these maps may look more than the actual meterage difference. Does that make sense? But it's still important of what has then occurred there. Now, stuff. I'm going to go up into Kharkiv. Of course, it's Kharkiv up here. This is where we had those things that there may be Russians clearing mines. We know Ukraine built a heap of defensive works up in this area, and have spoken about that there could be attack. Well, we have seen today a TV tower in the center of Kharkiv brought down by Russian forces. So let's actually watch. Well, we've got like 10 videos. We'll watch this video first. So this is from an office block. We can see the whole top has snapped off and plummeting down there, destroying that communications tower. Now, everyone's saying TV tower. Of course, anything that can relay frequencies can be used in many other ways. Is this a war crime? Striking communication or possible communications? No, it's not. Even if it's dual use, we know that Russia is using Kyivstar SIM cards for drones and phones and all this. We also know that Ukraine's using Kyivstar and all these other things as well. Striking communications like this, is it a war crime? No. And as well, good news in this was no one is said to be killed from these strikes as well. So we can see this then damaged down on the ground, causing major issues. And Zelensky has spoken about it, saying they're trying to get this back up. So I have a 154 here. So I've struck Kharkiv at the TV tower. Obviously an intimidation to make the terror noticeable. Whole city to try and limit Kharkiv in terms of communication and access to information. But if you don't think that any of these towers are also dual use, well, they will be. Work is underway to restore the signal. And talks about this, just like in these cities, why we need extra Patriots. And we know some relief may be coming on the Patriot front, but nothing is confirmed yet. There's pledges, there's this, there's that, but as far as confirmed, no. Now, Fighter Bomber said this: we didn't really expect anything. They tried to dump her starting from the end of Feb, beginning of March 22. So they actually tried to bring this tower down before that. 6 FABs in salvo. They caused minor damage to the tower, which after communications and signal transmission were restored very quickly. So they had damaged it previously, and Ukraine managed to get back up. After loss of the bomber on March 5th, attempts were stopped. And difficulty of hitting a TV tower is quite comparable to a cell phone tower. It's such an epic hit. It's a great success. It is still unclear how they got there, a rocket or a drone. I think we'll find out soon. A tower is primarily a mast for placing repeaters and receivers, communications, internet, TV, radio, signal. Everything should have disappeared among crests back in 2022. So this is, like he said, this is should be the first sort of things you hit to try and limit those comms, as well as electricity, things like that, in just looking at war. And if you look at like the invasion on Iraq. Now, we've spoken about this. Let's have a look at, well, let's talk about Kharkiv further. There is a lot of buzz regarding the news of a possible offensive in Kharkiv. Recall that the Ukrainian army has been preparing for this offensive since winter 22 by building large fortifications. Russian army has managed to gather a large number of troops along the northern border, but it is not certain that they will be used for penetration into Ukrainian territory. It is inevitable that this operation will happen, especially since the Russian government is aware that it must have moved the combat zone away from the localities of Belgorod. So, of course, those crossings back in. Most likely, we're seeing a new maneuver of the Russian command due to force Ukrainian army to send more reinforcements to Kharkiv and Sumy, achieving the same deterrent effects as the border with Belarus. In this way, the sending of reinforcements is going to harm even more Ukrainian rotations on the eastern front, from where the Russian troops will continue their offensive during the rest of the spring. So the spring offensive by Russia, yeah, they may not want to actually have a cross here, but if there's the increased threat of that, Ukraine, with the manpower shortage, has to move soldiers along, of course, Belarusian border, across the Russian border, and you're going to have limited troops on the front line. As we already know, there are huge manpower issues in Ukraine, and I don't believe that more money going in fixes that. It may help some morale, maybe, but this is something that Ukraine have to fix. The West can't fix this unless they want to deploy in guys to be, rear echelon, which is just not going to, I just can't see it happening now that over 2.5 years in the war and how unpopular of a decision deploying Western forces would be. It has to be fixed within Ukraine. We're going to talk about mobilization a bit more in a second. Now, down near Seversk front, Bilohorivka, seen something very interesting, that Russia are using a massive smoke curtain here. Let's limit this bloody noise, so that Ukraine won't have the amount of success with, of course, ISR collection from drones, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, as well as the use of FPV drones. Of course, you're not going to have this in a huge smoke screen. So we can see the absolute limited observations here, and I believe we're probably going to see more and more of this as drones are becoming more and more prevalent on the front line in every direction. Now, this movement was the only movement we actually saw on the map. Come down, talk about Krasnodarivka, another area where Russia are attempting to get a break in. Like we've spoken, the break-in is the hardest part. Now, depending on the map, will depend on what level of break-in has been achieved or not achieved here. But we can see where these maps, particularly in the south, are lining up very differently. Situation west Donetsk City. During the last 6 days, Russian army made new advances inside Krasnodarivka, taking control over the cemetery and parts of these streets. So a move from the north in. We know that Russia had success down this railway line here. How much presence is actually here? Well, we don't know, but we definitely know there is some. Now, we'll talk just south of here, Mariinka. No change shown then on this map, but Noel reports does show differently again. So we can see this crossing here. This is the second reservoir, and he's mapped his map to look more similarly to then the MOD map update here. If we look where this road is, very similar, that there was on his mind an advancement there, but it's shown on this map for a couple of days. But what we show this for is it is lining up, and we know where there has been further shifts and changes on the map, and confirming where they are. We're attempting to do this from multiple sources. Now, did I do all the stuff I wanted to on the comms? Yes. And then let's have a look at aid going in, and we'll talk about further mobilization. Now, I just want to have a look at some of these comments from Ukrainian bloggers speaking about mobilization and troops on the front. One thing I do see is none of these people can just talk about this are then going and actively signing up and volunteering to help relieve and fix the issue. But I cannot believe that Ukraine, this deep into the war, is still debating mobilization. And this guy, I get that they want to protect their kids, but the need but they need the manpower. It's out of madness. I understand your dedication to the Ukrainian cause, Andrew, but if you had children and brothers that you would have to send to their deaths, or just to send the front line, perhaps you would think a little more carefully about this. And yeah, it's one thing to sit back and look at this. People should mobilise people. They should mobilise people. People should volunteer. But when it comes to individual circumstances, well, that all has a very different effect. And of course, the protection of kids, there already is a demographic issue in Ukraine, and this is being, of course, exacerbated by this war launched from Russia. The alternative to becoming a slave and or then genocide. And there's this guy says here, the alternative is fleeing west, which millions of Ukrainians will do if Russia makes significant advances. People know they have this option, the men too. It would, of course, mean the end of Ukraine as we know it. And this is the problem with these advancements on the front line. And of course, it was the massive problem with the money being held up in the US, which of course has been overturned, is coming through. But the more failures on the front line and more area that Russia managed to get and these strikes further in, it's not helping people have a positive outlook towards mobilization or volunteering to fight. And many, many people are saying that there are young men hiding everywhere over the capitals as well. And it's such a difficult situation of we need to mobilize to hold on, but that same decision may leave people out, and it's not helping. Ukraine's in an incredibly, incredibly tough situation of what is happening. But I think this can be relieved with changes that can be done by Zelensky and done by Syrskyi for demobilization, rotation off the front line. When I look at Ukrainian, not just these bloggers talking about what they see, but when I look at Ukrainians in Ukraine who could be mobilized, that is what they're talking about. When do I demobilize? How long do I have to be there for? And is there active rotation? Now, I guess we will see what becomes of that. But of course, it's a very, very hard issue that money can be fixed from the West. The weapons can be fixed from the West. Manpower, no. And I'm waiting to see when all these other bloggers who going about this war, I'm waiting to see when they go and sign up, and some of them moving back into Ukraine from the West. Now, aid. We know there is more aid going to Ukraine. This should relieve some of this. So the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, but he visiting Poland on Tuesday to discuss European security and the threat from Russia. Now, the UK plans a £500 million in military funding, so $1 million Australian dollars, if anyone cares about Australian dollars. Apparently, the Australian government's taken on Elon Musk. Good luck with that. But vital equipment to Kiev, including 400 vehicles, more than 1,600 missiles, 4 million rounds of ammo, 60 boats, as well as an additional this money, and $3 billion this financial year. So a hell of a lot, and this will have some relief plugging holes in the front line. But like I said, that like empty bucket analogy, if you think of that. But missiles will have an effect behind the line, but we'll see what that will have on the actual front line. We know Ukraine is having some success behind the line in Russia, but it's seemingly to have no effect on the actual front line movements. Now, saying defending Ukraine against Russia's brutal ambitions is vital for our security and for all of Europe. If Putin is allowed to succeed in this war of aggression, he will not stop at the Polish border. And this is what we're hearing the last 12 months. I'd probably normally say a couple of months, but we're hearing this last 12 months more and more that Russia has ambition well beyond out of Ukraine and beyond. When we're hearing this, when they only occupy under 20% of Ukraine, and any country next is NATO, other than Moldova. I don't know. I don't buy it, and I don't think other people are buying it. I get the idea we need to defend Ukraine and money and blah, 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 but that argument I just don't buy. I just don't buy that. It doesn't mean that I don't support supporting Ukraine, but I don't buy that there is some ambition to then sweep over NATO. Not only the ambition, but the ability to either. It's not there. They're struggling here. Anyway, it was struggling here against and against MiG-29s. What it's going to be when they're up against 1,000 F-30, whatever. I'm just ranting. But here goes Zelensky. Know one thing. If Ukraine falls, then Putin will certainly invade the Baltic countries. Why? Not because he has an interesting idea or strategy, but because he wants to bring back the influence of the Soviet Union. He's not hiding it. He wants to return forcefully through war and all independent former republics of the Soviet Union that are now independent. Whether they're in NATO or not, this does not concern him. Trust me, it would concern the military advisors to Putin about if they're NATO or not. But he's not scared of NATO countries. And so it is his strategy, undoubtedly, after the Baltic states, Poland and part of Germany will be under threat. And this is where this just isn't lining up. If we actually believe, okay, let's take this on face value. They're saying that if we don't fund Ukraine, that Russia has then the ability to roll through Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Czech Republic into Germany, Lithuania, Estonia. If we're saying that Russia then has that ability, what chance does Ukraine actually have to holding up to that? That if they're going to push through NATO, if we're saying that Russia, they're not going to stop, they're going to push through NATO, I think this is backfiring. People going, well, then what chance have we got here? This is what I just don't buy it. I just think there's way better propaganda strategies to try and get funding than this idea of they're going to roll through Berlin again, because that's just not going to happen. Focus on the defense of independent states, upholding values, blah, blah, blah. I think that is a better, more logical argument rather than the Russians are going to be paratrooping on Willie's house in Australia, because my rant is done. Legends, I hope you're having a great day. Sorry, the last couple of days have just been a bit monotone shit. I've had a lot on. Please look after yourselves. If you'd like to support me, there's a link below. But I'll speak to you tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.